Welcome to Generations, a show which helps people 50 and better lead happy, healthy, and productive lives. Here's your moderator, Nadia Giordana.
Hello and welcome to Generations, the Roundtable Edition. We have an interesting subject today, World War II. We have a couple of guests. Our first guest is Gloria VanDemmeltraadt, and she is the author of Darkness in Paradise. That is a memoir of her husband's life growing up in Indonesia, and we're looking forward to hearing what she has to tell us about his story. Co-hosting with me today, Ellie Freed. Hi, Ellie.
Hi, I'm happy to be here as well and to learn all I can from Gloria. Thank you.
And Karen Risette, welcome.
Thank you, Nadia, and everybody. Good to see you and meet you for the first time. And I think we're going to have an interesting discussion. Maybe hard to hold back because there's so much to talk about on this subject. So we'll rely on you, Nadia.
There will be an awful lot to talk about. And Gloria, we're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to meet Ellie and Karen.
Maybe what you could start with, you mentioned you had a passage you wanted to read out of the book. Why don't you start us off with that, and then we'll talk about this story.
Oh, okay. I'll tell a little bit about it. The book, Darkness in Paradise, was done, my husband was born in what was the Dutch East Indies that later became known as Indonesia. And he was 6 years old when the war started, and his father was taken away to prisoner of war camp immediately when the war started, and he did not see him for 4.5 years, so he was gone the whole time. And the book tells about his experiences and life through the war. One reason why I wanted to read this little piece is because many people don't know. We know how the war started in Europe. And the bombing of Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, and the war in Indonesia, or in the Dutch East Indies, started a little right after that in January and February of 42. And it's kind of an interesting piece, so I will go ahead and read that.
Please do.
Okay. Thank you. The Battle of Singapore, or the Fall of Singapore, was fought just prior to the invasion of the Dutch East Indies in February of 1942. The city of Singapore, called an impregnable fortress, was an anchor for the operations of the American, British, Dutch, Australian Command, called ABDACOM, which was the first Allied joint command of World War II. ABDACOM expected Japan would attack from the sea, and all of their cannons and artillery were trained on the sea. Instead, thousands of paratroopers landed inland. They had foldable wooden bicycles and light tanks that they used to easily carry themselves and their weapons through the jungles. Unable to turn their cannons around in time to fight against the paratroopers, and cowering from surprise air attacks as well, Singapore fell in only 8 days. Prime Minister Winston Churchill called the fall of Singapore the worst disaster in British military history. The Japanese began their assault on the Dutch East Indies soon after the fall of Singapore. At the beginning of 1942, there was also a terrible sea battle between these ABDACOM forces and the Japanese, called the Battle of the Java Sea. ABDACOM suffered a disastrous defeat by the Imperial Japanese Navy. The fearless commander of the ABDACOM Navy forces, Rear Admiral Carroll Dorman, whom some of us have heard of, was killed in the battle, and the Dutch Royal Navy surface fleet was basically eradicated from Asian waters. This was essentially the beginning of the end of Dutch domination of the East Indies, and they never again regained control of their colony.
So that's how it began.
That's how it began, yes. And the land forces came to Singapore and conquered that, and then they began invading the Dutch East Indies as well. They came on the beaches, and my husband tells a story about a man his father knew with one tank. They had one tank. And he was so courageous that this man would be shooting away at the Japanese people coming in at the sea, and then they would have him tracked, and they'd be shooting at him from their ships in the ocean. So he'd go away, and then he'd come back and shoot some more, and go away and come back, and he was waiting for the land troopers behind him to come and help him. And it turned out it was so hot they were all resting beside the side of the road.
Oh dear.
Such a story.
It is, and
Oh my gosh.
and my husband just told me this story, and that actually story is not in the book because he just told it to me. And his father happened to be in prisoner of war camp with the driver of this tank. And what happened when he was captured, finally the Japanese troops came up and captured him, and he came out of his little tank. They shot the tracks off the tank, so he couldn't do anything. He came out with his white flag, and the Japanese commander came up to him, wrote something on the paper, and handed it to him. And they told him when he went to prisoner of war camp, he should show this piece of paper, which he did. And apparently it was something about, commending him for his bravery, because he was such a brave person with his one little tank, and he had done so much damage and was so brave. He was commending him for his bravery. And that little piece of paper earned him better treatment in the camps.
I was going to say, would that mean for honor's
Absolutely.
sake he would be treated better?
Absolutely, because
Oh,
the Japanese believe so much in honor, and he was such a brave person that he was treated better in the prisoner of war camps throughout the whole war.
How
Others, of
interesting.
course, were not, but he was. Yeah.
So your husband grew up, well, he was born and raised.
Born and
There,
raised
yeah.
in the Dutch East Indies, and his father was a motorcycle driver and had an automobile and motorcycle dealership. And they started, Her Majesty's Royal Dutch Army began gathering forces when Europe was attacked. And Holland was attacked, I believe, in May of 1940, was invaded. And so they began getting, recruiting men, drafting men in the East Indies to be in the army. So his father was drafted. And as soon as this fall of Singapore happened and the Japanese began invading the Dutch East Indies, his father had to go to camp. And they were all, it took like 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks, they were completely occupied. They were totally annihilated. The Dutch army was defeated, and Abdicom, the whole British, Australian, Dutch, and East Indies group was defeated, and so all the military people were put in prisoner of war camps. at that
Well, that's
time.
fascinating, and I
Oh,
don't think we hear that much about this perspective of the story in today's recaps of the
No,
of the
we
war.
don't.
No.
So the stories then deal with Onno and his brother and his mother who survived through the war. They did not have to go to a civilian camp. That's another interesting thing. All the people there were given a number as to when they had to report to civilian camps, according to how native they were, if they were part Indonesian or part German or part Dutch. And his family was Indonesian, Dutch, and German. And so people who were all Dutch were a number one, and they had to go to camp right away. And a number two might have knew somebody that could help them. Well, his family turned out to have a number 8 because they had Indonesian and background and German, but there was quite a bit of Dutch in there too, and so they would have had to go to camp toward the end of the war. So, but they were basically, kept in neighborhoods were surrounded by guards, so it was almost like being in camp anyway, even in
House
where
arrest.
they lived.
Yeah.
In house arrest. And many families lived together in one house, and there are interesting stories throughout about how it was during the
I don't
wartime.
remember hearing any of this. I don't remember hearing anything
No,
about
there's
that.
nothing in our U.S. history books, and that's why my husband and I decided to do the book, because I became fascinated hearing his stories.
Sure.
And I said, because I do write memoirs for people anyway, I said, how about capturing this and writing it down? Oh, he didn't know how we could start. How could we ever do it? We just started. And,
And it came
That's
out.
wonderful.
and
Yes.
it came out.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
There was a story, I think in one of the things that I read, a story about a Japanese soldier teaching Onno, your husband, to fish. Tell us that
Oh.
story.
That has some background too. Japan had invaded Korea way back in the early 1900s, and they were anticipating war, and this was even before World War I. And so many Japanese soldiers were actually Koreans. They were conscripted to be soldiers for Japan. So many of the soldiers in Indonesia were actually Koreans, but they worked for the Japanese army. And one day, in where Onno and his mother and family were living with a whole bunch of people in this house, this great big soldier with a gun taller than he was crashed in the front door, just bang, 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 bang on the door, and opened the door, and indicated, because he couldn't speak the language, that he was going to take a nap on the couch. And Tante Marie, Onno's Tante Marie, was to wake him in a half hour. Well, Tante Marie was a tiny little lady, but as Onno says, she was 7 feet tall in her bravery. And the soldier walked in and he lay down on the couch, put his hat over his eyes, and went to sleep. Well, after a half hour, she woke him up gently, and he went on his way. Well, he began to come every day. And he and Tante Marie became friends. They learned each other's languages a little bit, and he was a friend, and he began to care for the children there. He had a family at home that he showed them pictures of, and he actually took Onno and his brother out to this little place, a little stream, and taught them to fish.
Oh,
And
How
taught them to
nice.
fish. And
What a
there are
nice
many more
story.
stories about him. His name was Yastak, and Yastak became a very good friend, and did lots of other things that you have to read the book to find out.
Oh, that would be
No,
fascinating.
was he a Korean?
He was a
who
Korean, yes.
uh,
He was a Korean man, yes.
Uh-huh.
Oh, how sweet.
And
Yeah.
yes,
Sweet story.
yes. And actually, at the end of the war, he came to Tante Marie and Onno's mother, and was so worried about what would happen to them, because they didn't know whether Onno's father would come back from the war, if he had died in the camps. And he asked them to go home to Korea with him to his farm, that they could live with his family on
yeah.
his farm in
Oh, my
Korea.
goodness.
They had bonded so
They
well.
bonded so
Yeah.
well, yes.
Yeah.
And,
It is.
and
Did they do that?
No, they
Oh.
they did not do that, because they were, Tante Marie and Erna, Onno's mother, were determined that Fritz would come back. Onno's father would come back from the war, and they were going to be there when he came. So
sure.
his wonderful offer was gently refused.
Yeah.
Oh,
Did
that
his
is-
father come back?
His father did come back. He
Oh,
lived.
good.
He lived. Yes.
Such a story. And you know, we've got a second guest who's coming on to tell us more about World War II and her life growing up in post-war Germany. And that is Ute Buehler. Gloria, thank you for being here with us today and telling us we
Absolutely.
need so much more time to hear so
I
much
know,
more.
I
But I will
know.
be reading your book.
Oh, bless your heart.
I'd like
Thank
to
you.
read it
Thank you
too.
so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
We'll be
you.
back in just a moment. Welcome back, and with us now we have Ute Buehler, who grew up in post-war Germany, and she's here to tell us some of the memories that she has. Welcome, Ute.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you here. So let's talk a little bit about where did you grow up in post-war Germany?
I grew up in the city of Düsseldorf, which is about 20 minutes from the Netherlands border. So it's in that triangle, the Netherlands, Germany, and Luxembourg is a little bit further south there.
And you were born in 1948, so it was
Yes.
definitely the post-war years that
Yes.
you grew up. So there was quite an aftermath, I
Yeah.
assume.
Yeah, it was the year when the Deutschmark was created.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
So
interesting.
I mean, I have no conscious memory of that, of course, but my mom told me that every family got 40 Deutschmark to replace everything they had before, and they could spend it for whatever. They got it for free. However, there wasn't really much they had, so with that money, they had to buy everything. And people who had actually wares like needles or yarn or whatever you need for your household were quite well off.
Mm-hmm. So that made, so if they had goods and wares, they were better off.
Definitely
Okay.
better off, yes.
Yeah. Was there a lot of loss of wealth at that point in
Yes.
time when they made that changeover?
I don't know if, yes, I could imagine. I mean, I don't know really much about that, but I can imagine if you had like, let's say 1 million Reichsmark, which weren't really worth much, and you got 40 Deutschmark for it. It depends on how you see the conversion.
Okay.
I guess it's a little bit like when the wall came down and the East Germans had a lot of East German mark, and they got a one-on-one for the Deutschmark. All of a sudden they had a lot of money that was quite valuable.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And so were homes destroyed to the point where people had to restore a lot in their homes and replace? Was that the
Yes.
reason why there was so much that they needed?
Well, the money wasn't worth anything anymore due to the inflation.
Uh-huh.
So at that time I heard that, for example, for 1 pound of bread you were paying like 2 million Reichsmark and counting. So it didn't go any better. So that's why with American help, thanks to the Marshall Plan, Germany was put in a position to build this support net, to give their people a value that they actually could make a living or start making a living with again.
Uh-huh.
I'm Ellie, by the way.
Ellie, nice to meet you.
I imagine there was rationing going on the East Berlin. Was there on the West as well?
Yes, my mom told me that when my dad came back from the English POW camp, he worked in the street construction because streets had to be reconstructed too, and he got, I think, 2 food stamps for more eggs and butter, so they could actually get me through the first years of my life.
Wow.
My aunt told me that I grew up in a very small town that was not destroyed at all. So that hadn't been touched by the war.
That's kind of nice to be able. Have you been back to visit? And
Every year.
Sure.
Yes, I'm
Okay,
very
that's
attached
nice
to that
to
city.
know.
So Anne told me, because she had the department store in town, and she had the only car in the whole city, that she took valuables out into the countryside to go to the farmers and buy fresh food and what they had and what the city people didn't have. So she traded in rugs, jewelry, books, whatever the farmers wanted in return for nourishment.
Wow, enterprising.
Think about how creative people had
Yes.
to be to get through, and this is after the bombing is done. I mean,
Yes.
this is post the war, right?
That was post the war, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
uh-huh.
So, the creativity that was required to restore any kind of semblance of normal life,
Yes.
Was pretty amazing.
I think the provisional government had a lot of problems getting rid of the black markets because the black markets were really dominating
sure.
the life of people.
Uh-huh.
But that is beyond my personal knowledge.
Yeah. But there would have to be in post-war, when things are in chaos, there'd have to be a certain amount of black market.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
We had rationing here too, of course.
Yes.
My husband came from a family of 6 boys and 2 girls, and the parents and the grandmother lived with them. And he was the one who did the shopping, so he'd go into the store and order all this meat. And single people would come in and just be awestruck by what he was ordering. This little kid was ordering with his fistful of ration stamps.
Yeah. Yes.
I never heard about any black market stuff going on here, though. But I don't know, could have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably was.
Yeah.
Probably was, yeah. I would
Yeah.
think.
And my parents, my father was one of the post-war troops in Italy, so, and they married, and of course, then there I was a little bit later on, but that's all part of the post-war, and a lot of lives began at that time, and a lot of lives changed.
Yes.
Things were really, the shape of the world was changing at that time.
Yes. You mentioned that a lot of property was lost during the war. And my mom and my dad, they grew up in the city of Essen, which was the center of Krupp's cannon and weapons factories. And so Essen was basically like Cologne and like Berlin later on razed. So they lost, I think 3 times they lost their home. And there wasn't really not much left. But somebody just told me the story that they just went back to life, you know, put their stuff together and said, okay, this is what we got. We have
And
to deal
rebuilt.
with that. We rebuilt, exactly.
And 3 times they lost their homes
Yes.
too, so
Yeah, they lost their
that
homes.
town had it kind of rough.
Yeah, we still have a few pictures left, but that's pretty much it, I guess.
Some of my ancestors come from a little town near Essen,
Oh, yeah?
so I should talk to you about that
Yes.
afterwards.
Do you know the name of the town?
Well, they founded this little town, it's called Lethert, Lethert. It's a little village. It has like, a couple hundred people.
I don't think I know that one.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we
I was-
went to visit there in 2000.
And have you
So-
found it very much changed?
Well, I never saw it until 2000, so,
The whole area around Essen has changed completely.
Yeah,
It used
I
to
bet.
be mining and be mining, coal mining, and steel workers.
Oh.
It's not anymore. They have converted that to, I would almost call it a big park. So and with art, with museums, so all the old mines have been kind of converted into museums, into show business, palaces, and all of that. It's really quite beautiful now.
I bet.
That's a wonderful
grandfather-
outcome.
My grandfather's, the house where my grandfather was born was still there. And
Yes.
I was able to touch that house. It
Oh.
was very emotional.
Yes.
But this town is near the big radio telescope.
Oh.
At one point, it was the biggest one in the world.
Yes.
Oh, what is the name of it?
It'll come.
Yeah, I've got
It'll
pictures.
come.
We walked down and watched it, and it's moving all the time, and you can't even see it moving. It goes so slowly, you can't tell.
Yes.
Yeah.
I might ask, your cookbook, Guten Appetite, is that German recipes? Is
Yes.
that what? Because I haven't had a chance to
Yeah.
look at that yet. But
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, so the story is when I came to America almost 20 years ago now, the first thing people said, oh, German, oh, you're German. So Lederhosen and Porknuckle and, sauerkraut. And I said, well, that would be Bavaria. I'm coming from the north of Germany, which is a little bit different. And so I decided to write down my stories of the northern part of Germany with locations that have nothing to do with Bavaria. And started out with family recipes, and then I asked friends for their recipes, and grandmothers and uncles and aunts for their recipes, and so that's how.
So there's a
this
lot of
came
family
together.
recipes
Yes.
in there. Ooh, how
And they
great.
all have been tested in America with American ingredients by my husband personally.
Did the rest of your family come here too when you did?
No. I came alone.
Are they are they still there? Do you get to see them when you go back each year?
I have a brother and a sister. Yes, and I visit them every time.
Yeah, that's good.
It's a wonderful story of hope overcoming and being more positive about what you could do in the future, and even what you're relating with your cookbook and your recipes and so on. Because in my family, my grandfather was German, very characteristically German, and in a very strong personality and so on. But he allowed my grandmother, who was Norwegian, to really kind of dominate the cultural education in our family. So I know a lot about Norway, Norwegian food, and I've always wanted to know more about German food. But he always took a back seat and let her do that with teaching us all how to make the traditional dishes and so on. So I have to look at your
Yeah.
recipe book.
You know, that also may have to do with the fact that Germans weren't proud of their past in Europe. So when I was in the early 70s, I traveled a lot throughout Europe. I had friends in Spain and in France. And so I traveled to France, I traveled to the Netherlands, and Spain was not so much a problem. But in where Germans had been bad people, okay, I wasn't well received. So I remember in Normandy and in Bretagne, for example, I was really spit at when somebody found out I was German. In the Netherlands, I wasn't served. I was sent on the wrong way when I asked for the way.
That's hard.
Oh,
That's hard.
yeah.
But it happened, I think it happened to a lot of
absolutely,
people.
yes.
Yes.
I mean, even in the I think it was in 1980s, I visited Brussels. And there was this lady who saw that I was looking for the way back to my hotel, and I speak French. So we spoke French, and then all of a sudden she said, "Where in France are you coming from?" And I said, "I'm not from France, I'm from Germany." And she said, "Oh, I need to tell you a few things." And then she started berating me for what my people had done during the war. And I said, "You know, I really can find my way to my hotel myself." No. The whole way to the hotel, she was talking to me.
She followed along with you. and-
Yes. And it was interesting, though, because, you know, it was the other side of the story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was very important for me, actually, to learn more about that, to the
It
personal
Demonstrates how
involvement.
much pain there was
Yeah.
and how much
Yes.
residual pain.
Yes.
And it took a long time, and, you know, it never
Yes.
goes away completely.
doesn't.
But
No.
that's still going on
Yeah,
today.
it
Yes.
still is.
Yeah,
Yeah, with other cultures.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing I think we never quite get fully past, but it helps to remember
Yeah.
and to tell those stories. And it looks like we're running out of time, and I'm so surprised because in the first segment we did also, because there's so much to these stories and there's so much to the memories. Ute, thank you for being here with us today and talking to us about what your life was like.
Thank you for having
And
me.
Ellie and Karen, thank you for hosting with me today, and thank you for watching our show today. I hope we'll see you next time.